If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Russian President Vladimir Putin reiterated readiness to host Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky in Moscow if talks are well prepared and productive, cautioning against meetings for the sake of meetings. Speaking in Beijing at the close of his 4-day trip, Putin noted U.S. President Trump urged such talks during their Alaska summit. He questioned Zelensky's legitimacy, claiming his term has expired without legal extension. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov added Moscow still prioritizes peace, citing progress in direct negotiations in Turkey earlier this year, including prisoner exchanges and repatriations of fallen soldiers. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico called it embarrassing that other EU leaders skipped China's victory parade, marking 80 years since Japan's surrender in World War II. Speaking in Beijing, where he joined Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and other leaders, Fico said Europe risks irrelevance by ignoring global shifts in power and failing to engage in dialogue. He emphasized honoring all victims of fascism and argued a new world order is emerging. Fico, who also attended Russia's May 9th Victory Day parade, continues aligning Slovakia with leaders outside the EU mainstream, drawing criticism from some Western officials. Kremlin officials played down U.S. President Trump's Truth Social post suggesting Russia, China, and North Korea were conspiring against Washington during Beijing's massive World War II parade. Russian aide Yuri Ushakov said he hoped Trump was joking, stressing no plots exist. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov echoed that the remarks were figurative. Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, and other leaders attended the event after the SCO summit. U.S.-Russia-China ties remain strained amid Trump's tariffs, sanctions, and the Ukraine conflict, though Trump recently met Putin in Alaska to mediate a ceasefire. The Federal Appeals Court ruled 2-1 that President Trump cannot use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to expedite deportations of alleged Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang members. Judges said the law applies only in declared wars, not peacetime immigration cases, and blocked deportations in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. More than 250 migrants deported under the policy have since returned to Venezuela. Judge Andrew Oldham dissented, saying courts should defer to presidential authority and national security. The case is expected to head to the Supreme Court for a final decision. American actress Robin Wright told The Times she felt liberated moving to England, praising its freedom, even as Irish comedy writer Graham Linehan was arrested at Heathrow for social media posts critical of transgender activism. Police cited 3 tweets, including one urging resistance to men and women's spaces. Released on bail, Linehan was banned from posting on X while under investigation. Critics, including J.K. Rowling and Elon Musk, called the arrest totalitarian. Supporters argue the UK's speech restrictions protect minorities, though critics warn free expression is being eroded. Keir Starmer returned to the Commons today for his first Prime Minister's Question showdown with Kemi Badenoch for 7 weeks after MPs returned from their summer holidays earlier this week.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure we would have heard all that sympathy if it was the Conservative Deputy Prime Minister who was being attacked. I remember when the Prime Minister said that tax evasion is a criminal offence and should be treated as all other fraud. If he had a backbone, he would sack her. But let's get back to the issue of borrowing. He did not answer why it is so high. Conservatives left him the fastest growing economy in the G7. Under him, the cost of our borrowing is now higher than in Greece. Why does the Prime Minister think this is?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, if it had been the party opposite, there wouldn't have been the accountability that there now is in place, because they spent years and years avoiding it. And she makes her claims about the economy under their watch are about as credible as her place at Stanford University, frankly.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
Okay, Richard Gage is AIA, is a member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now heads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation, along with his courageous wife, Gail, at richardgage911.org. That's richardgage911.org. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high rises after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. The organisation he founded, AE 9/11 Truth, now numbers more than 3,600 architects and engineers, demanding a new investigation into the explosive destruction of all 3 World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. First of all, Richard, thanks for joining us.
To be here with you.
I recall that for many reasons. One, because of the enormity of the collapsing of the towers, and at that stage we had believed that these planes had, there was an act of terrorism. Planes flew into the towers. My wife was in Paris heading to New York, and you think, wow, I wonder what's happening. If ever I've seen a distortion of the truth that impacts America in every way possible and the world, this is it, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. We have been scammed. This was a false flag operation that was designed to manipulate the American people, the Australian people, and all the people of the world to go to war. The media drummed up the march to war, and those corporations who enriched themselves by going to war, including the banking industry, the oil industry, the insurance industry, and the arms industry, of course, they all profited enormously. And we're going to talk today about the evidence in the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11, which were the key elements to drag us into these Middle Eastern wars and the $6.5 trillion global war on terror.
So, okay, bring us up to speed. Where are we at the moment?
Well, we're looking for the last 19 years at the evidence available in the World Trade Center. That's what we focus on. That's why 3,600 architects and engineers demand a new investigation. We look first at Building 7, the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history, which should have been the most studied structural failure ever, but it wasn't. After the Twin Towers, I mean. And so here's a 47-story skyscraper, easily the tallest building in the world, in most of our states. But next to the tallest buildings in the world, they were surely seemed dwarfed. It surely seemed small. But after witnesses heard explosions at 5:20 in the afternoon of 9/11, this building, which was part of the World Trade Center and was not hit by a plane, after witnesses hear explosions, it drops like a rock straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. This is incredible. We've never lost a steel frame fire protected structure ever due to fires. And yet there's been much larger, longer lasting, and hotter fires in these buildings. But not one, not even after 9/11, with fully engulfed fires that we have in these buildings, including Grenfell in the UK. But so we have to look at the evidence and say, well, what was explained to us? Well, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they were tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people. They came out 7 years later with their report. And what did they conclude? Fires brought this building down. Okay, wait a minute. Fires have never brought down a steel frame fire protected structure. So they're just lying right off the bat. And they have this elaborate collapse initiation theory. Not one of the dozen components in it makes any sense. We've disproven all of them at our website, richardgage911.org. So we have to look and say, what was it? Well, you compare it to a controlled demolition like here in the U.S., the old hotels. They come down straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into their own footprint at free fall. That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. Well, the bowling ball has no resistance. This building had 40,000 tons of structural resistance in its structure. So, not that means that not one of those 82 columns on any floor gave any resistance for this building's uh, free fall collapse, and symmetrical, meaning they all had to come out at once. And the fires that are few, small, and scattered do that. No. So we found that there's evidence of extreme heat also in the destruction of all three of these towers, including molten iron pouring out of the South Tower minutes prior to its collapse, including molten iron droplets found in all the World Trade Center dust by the U.S. Geological Survey in the studies of the dust. They don't know where they came from. They don't speculate. But the EPA says, oh, this molten iron, these droplets, previously molten iron, we don't know where they came from, but it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has these billions of these spheres in it. So we find that. We find pools of molten iron. The firefighters describe it as flowing down the channel rails like lava from a volcano. And this is incredible evidence. Even the FEMA, they find in their 2002 report, before NIST took over the investigation and threw it out, the FEMA finds and documents in their metallurgical examination of the steel hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel, liquid iron invading the grain boundaries of the steel. This is amazing. How can this happen? Liquid iron is the byproduct of thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. And so that's what we find in the slag that is on all the steel beams, evidence of thermite being applied. They even find evidence of unignited thermite in the form of nanochips, found by a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen. They produced a 24-page peer-reviewed paper in which they proved that they thought they were paint chips, these red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other. They analyze them. They find that they're composed of aluminum and iron oxide, the ingredients of thermite. And what's that doing in all these paint chips? Well, they zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope and find nano-sized particles, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair, of these particles. And they go, whoa, this is weird. Where did this come from? Well, they do some peer-reviewed literature. They find that Lawrence Livermore Lab developed this stuff prior to 2001. It's called super thermite. And when they put it in a differential scanning calorimeter, just like Lawrence Livermore, they find that it's thermitic material. It's not paint. Paint doesn't produce thermitic responses when it's ignited. And what do you think it produces when it's ignited in the DSC? The previous molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found and documented in all the dust by the USGS and RJ Lee Group. So this is a complete circle of self-corroborating, repeatable evidence that could put the real perpetrators for 9/11 away for a long time.
It's truly it's an attack from within on the American public, of course, and the lies. I mean, it's if you look at some of the events since then, such as look at COVID, for example. Look at what Biden did to the American people and the cover-ups and the corruption. Was this, do you think, the start of a bigger agenda from government?
Well, it wasn't the start. Big agendas and false flag operations have been used to start every major war that we've been in. The manipulation, as I've found out reluctantly, goes way back. I mean, this was a huge wake-up call for me in 2006 when I heard David Ray Griffin on the radio. He was giving some of this evidence, and I'm going, what are you talking about? I'm an architect. I would have heard if there was a third skyscraper that came down. No, they hid this from us. This is one in a long line. The Gulf of Tonkin was started. That started the war in Vietnam. That was a false flag operation released. We found out about that. World War I, World War II, all started with different forms of false flag operations. And the war in Gaza, same thing, started with a false flag operation managed by the Mossad. So we've proven that, and by the way, on our another lecture at richardgage911.org, among many others who have shown this evidence. But yeah, that's the next one that we're looking after. After all, they gave COVID, like you mentioned, over the last 4 years, lies upon lies upon lies to achieve the ends of big government, big control, surveillance state. It's very bad. Not to mention a depopulation agenda, which has been proven as well by many frontline doctors and others in the health freedom movement.
I was trying to play. We're trying to do this piece by piece, if you don't mind. We have a bit of time too. Cam, could you play "Collapsing," please?
This is not a collapse whatsoever. They're trailing thick white smoke clouds. Well, what are thick white smoke clouds doing trailing steel? Steel is not flammable in office fire or jet fuel conditions. What is that? That's the aluminum oxide ash, the other byproduct of thermite, in addition to molten iron, which was found, as we mentioned, in so many different forms. So we have them trailing these thick white smoke clouds of aluminum oxide ash, proving there's a dozen proofs of the use of thermite and nanothermite in these towers. And they're ejected laterally. There's enough explosive force here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. Remember, gravity works down. Something else is going on here. Incredible outward force. It looks like a volcanic eruption, as a matter of fact. You can't tell the difference. Solid, molten objects ejected laterally, trailing thick white smoke clouds. It does not even look like a collapse. We're told in the official narrative that the planes hit the towers at this point, and then above, in the case of the North Tower, 15 stories, it drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. Well, not only does that violate Newton's third law of physics, it didn't happen. The top part was being destroyed itself. We can see that in the first 3 seconds of the collapse. After that, you see what we're seeing on the screen now. And so what really happened? It's exploding out and away from the core and leaving the core column standing 900 feet for 6 seconds in both cases, the North and South Tower. And then it is destroyed by another explosion. So we have the evidence just in looking at the videos, which we were programmed to accept the official narrative. We're gaslighted. We're told it's an orange, but it's an apple. We're told it's a natural collapse due to the broken columns from the plane and the jet fuel starting fires, and then weakening of steel, and then a gravitational or pancaking collapse. But what we're seeing is something else completely. It's the building blowing up, and we don't have the pile of slabs at the bottom that we'd expect in a gravitational collapse, 110 floors, each an acre in size. Well, this is a third the weight of the building, the concrete. We should have seen a massive stack of pancakes, but we don't. We see any, hardly at all. We don't see 50. We don't see 10. We don't see 1 acre-sized floor, or even a half acre, quarter acre, 16th acre. It's just not there. Well, maybe the steel. No. The steel was ejected laterally up to 600 feet away. So that's together, the steel and the concrete, 2/3 of the weight of this building, not even available to crush it. It's all been distributed laterally. In the case of the concrete, 30% of that dust, which is concrete powder. Much of the rest of it's gypsum powder. It landed from river to river across lower Manhattan. It's not available to crush the building. It's being pulverized in midair. By what? Maybe high energy explosives, maybe the extreme heat, 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, about half that Celsius, that can turn concrete to its original decomposed hydration products, as we're told by ASTM 856. That's the American Society of Testing Materials. So we have lots and lots of evidence for the destruction of this concrete, in all likelihood by nanothermite, those red-gray chips, which are inevitably painted on the bottom of each of the floors, and thus evaporated the metal decking, the floor trusses at 5,000 degrees. It releases those temperatures, and the concrete turning into powder.
What was the, okay, first of all, a lot of people have said the planes weren't real. I don't believe that. I think they were real, and I think it was just part of the act. What was the time from when the planes hit the tower, or both towers? But what was the time frame between plane hitting tower collapsing?
Well, in the case of the South Tower, it was about an hour, 56 minutes or so. And then an hour and a half in the North Tower, between the times the planes hit. When there was this big explosion, most of that jet fuel burned up outside the building. According to NIST, 90% of it burned up outside. The rest of it was gone in 10 minutes. It just started the fires that we see, which were diminishing in scope, area, and severity. At the time the buildings collapsed. Chief Oreo Palmer made it to the 78th floor. He said, there's small flames. I can put it out with 2 lines. And a minute later, the building collapsed on him and he died.
Okay, so for that hour to hour and a half, plane hits, building collapses, what would the process be to create the collapse? Were they, because again, it was an orchestrated event. What would have been happening in that time?
Well, people are trying to evacuate the building. The fires are traveling around looking for fresh new fuel sources and burning out in the process. And what we're told happened is that there's weakening of steel by these fires, and the floors sagged and pulled in the perimeter columns, and that weakened apparently all the way around the building. But what we hear from 156 first responders, orally recorded within a month after 9/11, they're talking about explosions, all of them. And many of them are talking about explosions before the tower collapsed. So this is rather extraordinary. They're seeing something, they're feeling something, they're hearing something, and then the building, in terms of explosions, and then the building collapses. So almost all of these witnesses are witnesses of explosions before the collapse. Same thing in Building 7. There's a half a dozen or more first responders and others hearing explosions before the building collapsed. It says nobody heard any explosions. Well, they're lying. We've got witnesses on our presentations right here at richardgage911.org. And so you can see them. So NIST is ignoring them. They're gaslighting us yet again about the witnesses. They claim to have interviewed 116 of them, but they ignore all the ones that have the relevant testimony.
So when the plane hit, and in that hour or 90 minutes, depending on buildings, there were explosions happening then, and that contributed to the collapse of those buildings. Is that right?
Well, we're talking about 2 to 12 seconds before. Well, if we want to show that, I'll talk about it. But
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. That come in.
okay, we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
But in the Twin Towers, we have explosions that are heard 2 to 12 seconds before the building comes down. We have squibs, or isolated explosive ejections, occurring 20, 40, and even 60 stories down below the gravitational collapse. Mistimed explosions, obviously. Explosion.
What's a squib?
Squibs are isolated explosive ejections. It's a term in the controlled demolition industry, as is the term pullet, which the owner of Building 7, the developer Larry Silverstein, referred to as, he says a year later on America's PBS, he says, well, there's been such terrible loss of life relative to the Twin Towers coming down. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And so they gave the order to pull, and we watched the building come down. Mm-hmm. So that's another term in the controlled demolition industry that Larry inadvertently perhaps let out. But he then bought the Twin Towers because they were moved from public ownership to private ownership just 6 weeks prior to 9/11. He put massive terrorist insurance on the whole thing that had never been there before, and it made out quite well, $5.68 billion. And these were laced with explosives. Excuse me. Yes, they were. But before, they were laced with asbestos, which the city of New York was requiring the Port Authority to abate at a $5 billion cost. Astronomical. I mean, Silverstein didn't even pay that much for these buildings. And did he know that his free asbestos abatement program was coming in just 6 weeks?
It's incredible. I go back to so I'm just trying to get, because we hear so much, and it's I'm not letting you go until I have my queries and my questions and theories answered. So plane crashes in the building, there's explosions, building collapses. What about the heat in the building? Because I'll tell you why I mentioned this. I was, and you probably saw it too. A little while ago, I saw a post. I'm not too sure if it was from you actually, but a post that had. They said if there was such heat that melted the structure in, the steel got so weak it just collapsed on top of each other, then why are there people above that floor, and why are there people out on the balcony not burnt to death?
Well, yeah, they exaggerate the severity of the heat and the fires in order to try to validate their theory that the steel was weakened by fire. Edna Citron, poor gal, was in the hole that the plane went into, waving for help. So, yeah, a fair question.
Mm. And we were talking to a gentleman the other day who was an investigator with the fire authorities in Australia, and he looked at this too, and he said it was impossible for what they said happened to happen. Can you tell me, because you mentioned that the first responders reported hearing explosions. Why wasn't that a red flag then to the investigators to say, this is not quite right here? Or was it predetermined what the report would say?
Oh, I'm sure it was predetermined. The report, the NIST reports in particular, were full of lies and inventions to try to create their story that this steel, in the case of the Twin Towers, was weakened by fire. In the case of Building 7, that the long span steel beams were expanding and pushing a girder off of its seat, resulting in what you see here. After witnesses hear explosions, yet again, this building drops like a rock straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint. This can only be done if all 82 columns are removed on, at least in this case, 8 floors, because that would allow for the collapse at free fall, meaning not one of those columns gave any resistance again. And so their whole elaborate collapse initiation theory and computer modeling is a Potemkin village. And we've exposed this in episode 4 of our film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. And we have we're in the boardroom presenting this evidence to a grand jury. And you can see all 4 episodes that we produced so far. We got 12 altogether at richardgage911.org. You can also see at the website there, by the way, a huge conference we're having in Washington, D.C., if any of you are going to be there. September 10, 11, and 12, 3 days of conference. Now, this conference is headlined by Senator Ron Johnson, a sitting senator who is also the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations. He has subpoena power. He's already called for a 9/11 investigation. He's speaking to us physically at this conference. And if you can't be there, I encourage everybody to look at the live stream. It'll be live streamed by Clayton Morris on Redacted, all of which you can find again at richardgage911.org. And Tucker Carlson will be joining us addressing that conference through the live stream.
It truly is one of the great, it's one of the great, I think, affronts, attacks on America. And to me anyway, and I know America had been involved in all sorts of nefarious, this is the government activities around the world, but to me, this was the most severe one within the borders of the US. I want to look at building number 7, if you don't mind. Cam, we've just been playing it. Can you just play this one more time? Richard, can you go through the process of it collapsing for us? And I want to ask you a couple of questions about, you mentioned the asbestos conspiracy or thoughts. I also want to determine who were the tenants, the people who were in the government agencies that were in that building. And at that particular time when it collapsed, if you could also allude to some of the investigations that were underway. Because you don't have to be an Einstein or a part-time investigator to understand that this made no sense at all unless you were trying to cover evidence. Cam, could you play Building 7 again? Richard, you want to...
Yeah, what you're seeing is a typical controlled demolition or implosion. You've seen this on TV. You have a frame of reference for it. You know what it is. And so you know when you're being gaslighted by the U.S. government and the Australian government, why, when they say this is, it fell due to fire. Wait a minute. Can you see any fires? There were some fires in this building, but they were nowhere near the collapse initiation location that NIST describes. They were burned out in that area completely. So what they have to do is to take out all of the columns at once and synchronistically time floor by floor. Shaped cutter charges, in this case with incendiaries, which is actually quieter than high energy explosives like C4 and RDX, which are used. But there are patents which use incendiaries like thermite to take out columns in structures. And so they're very effective, but more expensive. So this is the expensive way to do that. What NIST was describing was a horizontal progression across this football field length building from east to west, left to right. And if that were the case, you would have seen the building coming down in sections, if it was going to come down at all, and maybe tip over. You asked about asbestos and conspiracies. I don't have much to say about that. We do know that the buildings, all 3 of them, were only half occupied at the time of the at the time of the collapse, which is another reason they'd want to take them down, especially the Twin Towers. They were old white elephants. People didn't want to be in them. They don't have these big views with these picturesque windows. They're vertical 14-inch square steel tube columns marching every 3 feet 4 inches all the way around the building. And so you asked about the tenants in this building 7. We have the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is where the worst fires were, by the way, which lost thousands of files related to hundreds of cases that they were actively pursuing against Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom, which were busting open the deep state's secret methods and operations. But so those cases were just shut down after 9/11. We have the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Defense in this building. We have the 23rd floor, which is a bunker that was supposed to be used to control and manage a catastrophic event like we had on 9/11, but they abandoned it after the planes hit the towers, but before the towers came down. And we have Barry Jennings and Mayor Giuliani's attorney going back up into this building, not realizing that it had been evacuated and no one was up there on the 23rd floor where they were called to a meeting, but they were late. On the way down, what are they experiencing? Explosions inside the building, well before the towers ever came down. And they document this. Well, they would not relent on their testimony, particularly Barry Jennings, who was killed the day before the final report came out, and very mysteriously. So we need a real investigation as to all the evidence of explosions, including the witnessing of an entire elevator car blown out of its shaft on the 7th or 8th floor of this building, and laying next to, in the hallway, down the hallway 30, 40 feet, Richard Rotans, the deputy director of the Emergency Management Center himself, was the witness of this. He sees holes in the floor above him, columns dangling at about noon. This was after, in this case, the Twin Towers had come down. But those Twin Towers, while there was some damage to Building 7, it was not sufficient to blow an elevator car out of its hoistway and down the hall 40 feet. This is evidence of explosions, which shouldn't be. That means there's pre-placed explosions inside Building 7. Most people believe that it was intended to come down under the cover of the massive dust cloud which occurred when the Twin Towers went down. CNN announced the collapse of this building at 11:07. It doesn't come down till 5:20. The BBC announced the collapse of this building 20 minutes early, 5 o'clock that afternoon Eastern time. So it doesn't come down for 20 minutes. They apologize for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day.
Psychic.
They're psychic. Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, no, but what can you say? I mean, that's how good the media was in those days. They can tell the future. Look, we are running out of time, but can you just quickly... I'm always interested also in the Pentagon, the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. And we had, I've forgotten, a beautiful person. She passed away, had a website to do with conspiracy theorists, and was actually was a host on TNT. But she said it was pretty hard for the plane to actually crash into the building, because at the height it was flying towards the Pentagon. The engines would have hit the ground first, and it wouldn't have even reached the Pentagon.
Well,
she said, and I don't know how true this is, but where were the remains of it?
Yeah, all of us in the 9/11 truth movement, while we disagree on what did or did not hit the Pentagon, all of
Mm,
us agree that nothing should have hit the most highly defended building in the world.
mm,
And who's flying it? The Hani Hanjour, who failed Cessna flying school. And what is the plane doing? It's circling around in a 270-degree corkscrew, descending 8,000 feet per minute. Uh, and obviously a pre-scheduled, remotely controlled
mm.
aircraft. Most of us are of that opinion in the 9/11 truth movement. And where does it hit? Not down through the vulnerable roof structure over Donald Rumsfeld's office, but straight into the Army intelligence that was doing the auditing of the $2.3 trillion that Donald Rumsfeld had announced the day before 9/11, that was unaccountable for in the Pentagon budget over the decades. So, and all of that investigation went bye also. So we all want a real investigation. We all are calling for the videos to be released to show what really happened at the Pentagon.
You know, I have to say, Richard, this is one of my highlights. You've been a guest before on TNT, and I was immensely jealous because I think you are an amazing person, and what you were doing is enormously brave. And full commendation to you, sir. Somebody wants to find out more besides Richard Gage, 911.org, which you mentioned a couple of times in the interview. Can you tell me where else they could find out about you?
Yes, my courageous wife, Gail, and I are constantly traveling, constantly speaking, and all of that information and those activities are available on our website, richardgage911.org.
Richard Gage, thank you very much. Good luck with the event on the 10th, 11th, and the 12th, called Turning the Tide, with some marvellous people too, some magnificent people, including Mr. Carlson. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you to Gail too. This is The World Today.